Static testing is the easiest way to figure out whether a pipe or line, a skimmer, a main drain, a side suction, a spa jet system is leaking without having to pressure it up. I don't like pressure testing. You shouldn't like pressure testing. Pressure testing is not always clean cut. They don't always leave a perfect union at the equipment to disassemble and put a plug in. A lot of times you have to cut pipe, you have to glue pipe back together when you're done. A lot of times they'll plaster in the returns on a pool. They'll cover it with mud. We have to chip around it in order to get a good solid plug in there. When you're using static cones, you don't have to do any of that. So let's say you have returns in a pool and you have 3 of them. We'll plug 2 of them with a solid cone and we'll take our third, which has a pinhole and a cap on it, and we will put it in the third return. With everything off, we will put a little bit of dye in front of the hole. If the hole pulls dye, it's leaking. If the hole doesn't pull dye and pushes dye in and back out, we call that mushrooming, it's not leaking. It's really that simple. We could do it on a skimmer line. If we have a single skimmer with a single suction, we literally put this in and the cones are tapered. So if it's 1.5 inches or if it's a 2-inch line, which most skimmers are, you could put it all the way in, put a little bit of dye in front and check. Now, it's always good to isolate a line before you go ahead and static test. So if you have a valve over at the equipment, shut the skimmer line and then test it. Why? Because of the false positives. So let me give you a couple examples. If we have an equipment set that's below the pool grade, most of the equipment sets are usually a little bit above, right? Above the water line. But when we're below the water line, we have to isolate. If we don't isolate, we're gonna get a false reading because we could get a pull in a return line when it's actually leaking in a skimmer line. And because we're below grade. But if we shut all of our valves and isolate, that won't happen. Another time we could get a false positive is if our equipment is way above. So if we have a house up here, there's a pool all the way down here and the equipment is above grade, if our leak is above the water line, we're gonna get a false reading. So it's always important to pay attention to where the equipment setup is, if it's much higher than the level or if it's much lower the level before you go ahead and do what you have to do. This is good on spa jet venturis. You have 6 jets, you want to plug 5, put a pinhole on the 5th. It's important to know what a pool is made of. I like to babysit a pool and watch it run before I go ahead and even use my static cones to see if they're all the returns, if you're getting a return. Sometimes there's a hidden return. Sometimes we could have a grotto. Sometimes we could have a spa that's tied to a pool with a separate return and not even know it. So watch a pool's behavior, babysit a pool, and then we use these cones to properly static test before we have to get invasive.